there's this real chill you feel when you hear the stories, and there are these whispers about figures who just operate totally in the shadows. Their purpose is just as murky as, well, where they come from.
Exactly.
So today, we're going to try and look past the, the Hollywood version, the sunglasses and flashy gadgets.
Right, the pop culture image.
Yeah. We want to dive into the actual accounts, the research, try and figure out what's really going on with the Men in Black. Is it real? Is it something else?
It's a deep rabbit hole.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's venture beyond the known.
Well, the thing that strikes you right away is how these stories, stretching back decades, have this weird mix of consistency and just utter strangeness.
Okay, like what? Where does it sort of start?
You really have to begin with Albert Bender back in the 1950s. This guy was right at the heart of the early UFO craze.
Right.
He had this publication, Outer Space Review, sometimes called Saucer Review. People were reading it.
Right, a hub for enthusiasts.
Totally. Then, suddenly, he claims he was visited by these, men dressed in black.
The classic image, even back then.
Pretty much. But his description had this really bizarre detail. Glowing eyes.
Glowing eyes, seriously.
That's what he claimed. And supposedly, they didn't even speak aloud. They telepathically ordered him to stop publishing, just shut it all down.
Wow. Telepathically, that's intense. And did he stop?
He did. He shut down his publication, and whether you believe the glowing eyes part or not, Bender's silence itself created this powerful idea.
Which was?
That someone or something was actively trying to suppress information about UFOs, that unseen forces were silencing people.
And that idea just took hold, didn't it? Especially back then, pre-internet, someone just stopping like that.
Oh, absolutely. It sent ripples through that whole community. Then you get Gray Barker.
Right, the author.
Yeah, Barker jumps on this with his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers.
Catchy title.
It really was. And that book basically took Bender's story and ran with it. It solidified this image of the Men in Black as UFO silencers.
So Barker kind of amplified Bender's experience into a pattern.
Precisely. He cemented the idea that they often showed up in threes, that they didn't just go after witnesses, but researchers too. Anyone digging too deep.
Okay, so Bender starts it. Barker popularizes the silencer idea. Then who comes next?
Then you get John Keel. Keel is really the one who coins the actual term Men in Black, or MIs.
Ah, okay. So Keel gave them the name we all know.
Yep. But Keel's descriptions, they often went beyond just spooky government types. He brought in this really paranormal, almost unsettling quality.
How so?
Well, sometimes witnesses describe them as having this, dead look, almost like living corpses, really pale, sometimes stiff movements.
Creepy.
And bizarre behavior. There's just one famous case Keel wrote about, the Jell-O drinker incident.
The what?
Yeah, apparently someone claiming to be, an official from Project Blue Book, Richard French, I think it was, showed up acting incredibly awkwardly, and was apparently fascinated, almost confused, by a simple bowl of Jell-O. Just couldn't figure it out.
That's weirdly specific. What's the point of acting like that?
That's the question, isn't it? Was it genuine strangeness or some kind of calculated act to unsettle the witness? Keel leaned towards the genuinely strange, the paranormal.
So Keel adds this layer of high weirdness. But there are other threads too, right? Not just paranormal entity.
Definitely. This is where you start seeing this split, this duality. Are these paranormal beings, or are they maybe more terrestrial, covert human operatives?
Government agents, basically.
Potentially. Look at Katie Page's experience, the one on Rocky Mountain Ranch. She reported getting these electronic voice warnings, not a person in a suit, but a disembodied voice telling her to stay quiet.
Okay, so that points towards technology, maybe human tech.
It certainly could. And then you have researchers like Nick Redford who've dug up actual cases, documented instances of people who looked like MIBs but were wearing, say, Air Force uniforms.
Really? Impersonating military personnel.
Exactly. And apparently there are even declassified documents showing the government knew this was happening. They were aware of people impersonating officials to get UFO info.
That complicates things. So it might not be just one group.
It seems unlikely to be just one thing. Think about the USS Nimitz incident in 2004.
The Navy pilots, the Tic Tac UFO.
Right. Well, part of that story involves claims that the radar data, the physical data bricks, were allegedly confiscated shortly after.
By who?
By men who showed up, possibly in plain clothes, maybe flight suits with no insignia, just took the data and left, no explanation.
It sounds more like a covert human operation.
It certainly leans that way, and you connect that to more recent claims, like David Grush alleging this ongoing campaign of intimidation and suppression.
Yeah, he's been very vocal about that.
It paints a picture of potentially a very real, very human effort to keep a lid on things.
So we've got these two main possibilities. The truly strange, maybe paranormal MIB, and the possibly human government-linked operatives. Or maybe even both existing somehow.
It's confusing, right? But regardless of what they are, there are these recurring descriptions, these characteristics.
The look.
The look, the classic image. Black suit, crisp white shirt, black tie. Often a wide-brimmed hat like a fedora pulled low.
And the sunglasses. Always the sunglasses.
Almost always, hiding the eyes.
Yeah.
And they arrive in these plain, often black, unremarkable cars. Sometimes older models, sometimes newer, but always nondescript.
It's like a uniform designed to be intimidating but also forgettable.
Exactly. Menacing yet anonymous. But, there are variations too.
Ah.
Yeah, reports mention gray suits sometimes, or no hat at all. It's not completely rigid.
Okay. And what about their behavior beyond the Jell-O incident?
Well, Keel really focused on this awkwardness, this fascination with really mundane objects, pens, utensils, food, as we said. Like they were unfamiliar with everyday human life.
Almost like aliens trying to blend in badly.
That was certainly one interpretation Keel explored, but alongside the weirdness, there's almost always this undercurrent, or sometimes overt threat.
Right, the intimidation factor.
Absolutely. Direct verbal threats, warnings to stop talking, stop researching, sometimes implying harm to them or their families.
That's chilling.
People report having their homes or apartments seemingly searched, belongings rummaged through, but maybe nothing actually taken, just violated.
Psychological warfare, almost.
It feels like it. And then there are the electronic threats we mentioned, like with Katie Page, or the potential phone tapping that both John Keel and another researcher, Harold Key, suspected.
Harold Key. He was involved in that missing person case, right? Dennis Lloyd Martin.
That's the one. He felt his investigation was being interfered with, possibly electronically. It all adds up to this picture of invasive surveillance and psychological pressure.
Is there any, photographic evidence? It sounds like they'd be hard to capture.
Extremely hard. But there is one fairly well-known photo taken by Timothy Green Beckley. It purports to show a man in dark clothing, possibly watching the home of another ufologist, Jim Moseley. It's grainy, ambiguous, but it's often cited.
So these accounts exist. They're persistent.
Yeah.
How does this then cross over into, movies and TV?
The pop culture connection. It's huge. Think about Dan Aykroyd.
The actor. Ghostbusters, Blues Brothers.
Exactly. He was apparently developing a TV show called Out There about UFOs and the paranormal.
Okay.
And Aykroyd claims he had his own encounter with MMB-like figures who essentially pressured him, maybe indirectly, maybe directly, and the show got canceled. He's spoken about it publicly.
Wow. Okay, that's a direct link. And then obviously the big one.
The Men in Black movies, Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones.
Right. Which is funny because they turned the MIBs from these scary figures into, kind of cool, funny protectors.
It's a total inversion, isn't it?
Yeah.
The movies, which were based on a lesser-known comic book, took these menacing figures from UFO lore and made them the good guys, protecting Earth from aliens.
It's a massive shift. Do you think that, changed how people perceive the real MIB stories?
It's hard to say it didn't have an impact. It certainly made the term Men in Black globally famous. But did it dilute the fear? Or maybe, as some suggest, was it a form of societal conditioning, softening the blow?
Conditioning for what?
Well, that goes into deeper theories.
Yeah.
But just sticking with pop culture, you can't ignore the Blues Brothers look either, right? Aykroyd again?
Uh-huh. Yeah, the black suits, hats, sunglasses. It's uncanny.
It really is. And even a show like The X-Files.
Oh, yeah, Mulder and Scully?
While they were the protagonists, they were constantly up against these shadowy government figures doing secretive things, controlling information. The cigarette smoking man is basically an MIB archetype, just chain smoking.
True. So it raises that question. Does pop culture create the belief in MIBs, or is it just reflecting something people are already reporting and fearing?
Nick Redford, who we mentioned earlier, tends to argue it reflects existing reports and anxieties. But then you wonder, could the real MIBs, whoever they are, adapt?
Adapt how?
Well, if everyone expects men in black suits, maybe they stop wearing them. Maybe they adopt more inconspicuous clothes. Or maybe they shift tactics entirely.
Like using technology more. The electronic voices, maybe cyber stuff.
Exactly. Think about online harassment, shadow banning, disinformation. modern ways to silence or discredit people without ever putting on a black suit.
That's a sobering thought. The methods might just evolve with the times.
And there's another layer to the media thing. Whispers about government influence on UFO-related movies.
Like what? Studios getting leaned on.
There are persistent rumors, stories about the makers of Independence Day getting some, let's say, guidance, or the famous alleged letter from NASA or some agency to Steven Spielberg about close encounters of the third kind.
Really? What did the letter supposedly say?
The story goes it was expressing concern, maybe suggesting he toned down certain aspects or portray things in a particular way. Again, hard to verify, but the stories persist.
It feeds into that idea from Jacques Vallée, doesn't it? That maybe pop culture is used deliberately.
Vallée's idea of inoculation, yeah. That maybe these stories, even fictional ones, are a way to gradually prepare the public consciousness for something bigger, like eventual contact. Mind-bending
stuff.
Okay.
So I've got the history, the characteristics of pop culture links. But some cases just seem off the charts weird. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Beyond the usual intimidation, the encounter reported by Dr. Herbert Hopkins in the 70s is a prime example. It's just profoundly strange.
Refresh my memory on that one.
Okay, so Hopkins, a doctor involved in UFO research, gets this weird phone call. Someone identifying himself as a representative of a UFO organization asking to visit immediately.
Immediately?
Yes, and Hopkins agrees. Moments later, the man is at his door. Impossibly fast arrival.
Okay, weird start.
The visitor is described as completely hairless, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, very pale, waxy skin, wearing a black suit, hat, and strangely, bright red lips, almost like lipstick smeared on.
Lipstick. Okay, that is bizarre.
The man talks to Hopkins about his UFO case, then performs this strange trick where he makes a coin disappear from Hopkins' hand.
A magic trick.
Seems like it. But then comes the really chilling part. The visitor supposedly tells Hopkins to destroy all his UFO research materials, and then he connects the coin trick to Barney Hill.
From the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case.
Yes. The visitor says something like, referring to Hill's recent death from a cerebral hemorrhage, he had no heart, just as you no longer have a coin.
Whoa. That is deeply creepy. A direct, almost supernatural threat.
Totally. And then the departure was apparently just as strange. The MIB figure seemed to just fade or dematerialize somehow as he walked away.
That case just defies any simple explanation, government or otherwise.
It really does. It pushes right into high strangeness. And it's not always men in black either.
Right. You mentioned women in black, WIBs.
Yeah, there are reports, though fewer. Some descriptions sound like standard operatives, just female. But others are much weirder.
Weirder how?
Some accounts describe them with similar odd features, maybe overly pale, sometimes linked to that disturbing phenomena of the black-eyed children. Almost vampiric descriptions in a few rare cases.
Okay, now we're really getting into the deep end. Vampiric WIBs.
It shows the sheer range of phenomena people lump under this banner. And what's really fascinating is looking back, way back.
Before the 1950s. Before Bender.
Centuries before. There are historical accounts that have this eerie resonance. Take England and Scotland around 1665.
Okay, what happened then?
Reports from places like Greater Massingham and the Scottish borders describe darkly clad, pale strangers showing up shortly after unusual aerial sightings.
Well.
And these strangers reacted with threats, sometimes even violence, demanding silence about what was seen in the sky. Does that sound familiar?
It sounds exactly like the MIB template, but hundreds of years earlier. Could they be linked to older folklore? Supernatural figures?
It's a possibility some researchers explore, or does it suggest the phenomenon itself, whatever it is much older? Then there's Spring Heel Jack.
Ah, the Victorian bogeyman.
Yeah.
Leaping over buildings.
That's him. Started appearing around 1837, often described in dark clothing, sometimes a helmet or cloak, and crucially, glowing red eyes.
Glowing eyes, like Bender's visitors.
Exactly. And his behavior, while sometimes prankster-ish, was often menacing, intimidating, almost like a terrifying official figure.
And any other historical echoes?
There's a strange case from the Coke Forest in Belgium, 1954. Witnesses report seeing a light in the sky. Afterwards, they encounter this tall, extremely thin figure dressed all in black.
Like Slender Man, almost.
Very much that vibe. He apparently posed as a police inspector, asking questions about the light they saw. But as he left, witnesses claimed he seemed to grow taller, impossibly taller.
Okay, that's just reality bending.
It blurs all the lines, doesn't it? Officialdom, paranormal, high strangeness. And these encounters continue into more recent times, too.
Like
Philip Spencer's case in the UK in 1987, He allegedly took a photograph of a UFO, a really clear one.
Yeah.
Soon after, he claims he was visited by men in black who knew about the photo, demanded the picture and the negative, and intimidated him into silence. Classic MIB playbook.
Still happening in the late 80s.
And even later, there's an account from 1993 of a UFO researcher being overtly intimidated, followed, and approached by MIB-like figures at a London train station and later his hotel. It seems persistent.
So if we try to bring this back towards maybe more grounded explanations, what about official government interests? We talked about impersonators, but was there actual policy or concern?
Oh, definitely. The CIA's Robertson panel in 1953 is key here.
What did they conclude?
Well, officially, they concluded UFOs weren't a direct threat to national security. No evidence of hostile alien craft, basically.
Right.
But they identified an indirect threat. They worried that clogged communication channels during a real crisis, filled with UFO reports, could be dangerous.
Information overload. Makes sense.
And they were also concerned about potential Soviet exploitation using UFO groups for propaganda or even infiltration.
Ah, Cold War paranoia feeding into it.
Absolutely. And here's the really interesting part. Their recommendations.
Which were?
They recommended a public education or perhaps debunking campaign using mass media. Television, movies, popular articles. They even suggested possibly co-opting figures like Walt Disney.
Wow. Use cartoons and movies to downplay the phenomenon. That sounds like a plan to manage public perception, all right.
It does, doesn't it? And then, jumping forward, you have those declassified U.S. Air Force documents from 1979 we touched on earlier.
The ones about impersonators.
Exactly. Acknowledging official concern about individuals dressing up as officers specifically to get UFO information. It shows they were aware and worried about who was doing the asking.
So the government was definitely interested, maybe even involved in managing information, but it doesn't fully explain the sheer weirdness of some encounters.
Not even close, especially when you consider things like the reported physical symptoms. Some witnesses, after an MIB encounter, report feeling dizzy, nauseous, getting headaches, disorientation.
Huh. That sounds familiar recently.
It sounds a lot like the symptoms described in Havana syndrome cases, doesn't it?
It really does. Are you suggesting a link? Like maybe some MIB encounters involve early versions of whatever tech causes Havana syndrome?
It's pure speculation, of course. But the overlap in reported symptoms is intriguing. It raises questions about what kind of technologies might have been experimented with and when.
Decades ago,
Yeah.
potentially. And governments have always been worried about public reaction, haven't they?
Oh, for sure. Think about Winston Churchill during World War II. There's that famous story of an RAF pilot having a close encounter with a UFO.
And Churchill's reaction.
He allegedly ordered it classified for at least 50 years, fearing mass panic if the public found out. That concern about controlling the narrative and preventing panic seems constant.
So after all this, decades of stories, government documents, weird encounters, pop culture, where does it leave us? The Men in Black enigma feels bigger than ever.
It really does. It's this tangled web. You pull on one thread, say government secrecy, and it seems plausible for some cases.
Right, like the Nimitz data confiscation.
Exactly. But then you pull on another thread, like the Dr. Hopkins case or the historical accounts.
And it leads somewhere else entirely, somewhere much stranger.
Precisely. You have this intersection of potentially mundane explanations, covert operatives, psychological operations, and these truly bizarre, deeply unsettling encounters that defy any easy answer. They just don't fit neatly.
So for you listening, that's really the core of it, isn't it? This enduring mystery. Are the Men in Black just a projection of our own fears, a modern myth built on anxiety about surveillance and the unknown?
Is it all just in our heads, a cultural construct?
Or do these persistent, often terrifying accounts point towards something else, something operating genuinely beyond the known, maybe forces or entities we just don't have the framework to understand yet?
It's a question that lingers long after the stories fade. Are they human? Are they other? Or maybe both?
We really encourage you to think about this strange tapestry we've unraveled today. Consider the accounts, the possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, keep your own eyes open for things that operate in the shadows. Continue your own journey beyond the known.